Hi students, welcome to the video on chapter 5 about critical thinking. I wanted to play, or I'm going to play in a minute, the audio summary that comes with this chapter that the book's publishers put together, because I think it does kind of succinctly give you a review and an overview of what you've read. And that's mainly what this PowerPoint is designed to do. It's not a comprehensive look at our chapter, but there are a few things I wanted to stress in the chapter, and I wanted to help you make connections between this chapter and your next assignment, which is test taking. So talking about how does critical thinking factor into test taking, and then even the larger part of how does critical thinking factor into you being a successful student. So I'm going to play the summary of the chapter here and then maybe reflect on it for a moment, and we'll go on to the other slides.
Arguing, always asking questions, and being critical. No, I'm not talking about your overbearing mother. Those are, in fact, three of the most important building blocks in becoming a critical thinker. Becoming a critical thinker is a process. Let's review. By definition, critical thinking is the act of evaluating ideas, yours or someone else's. This is done by asking questions not only of yourself, but of others. And not yes or no questions either. Questions that beg more in-depth responses. Never stop asking questions. Let's go over the four-part model of critical thinking. First, there's reasoning, the foundation. Basically, reasoning is coming up with a conclusion based on an argument or on several arguments. How do you do this? Well, you first have to look at each argument and decide if you think it's sound or unsound. A truly sound argument must contain at least one reason for you to believe it to be true. It also must be relevant and adequate, meaning all the facts are there. If an argument lacks any of these, then it's not sound, and you have to do what? Start asking questions. Good answer. Also, study the top 10 list of ways to avoid faulty reasoning. You will be tested on it throughout your life. Well, the second part of the model is problem solving. Thanks to this course, problem solving just got a whole lot easier. It's simple. Like anything big and overwhelming, you just have to break it down. First, define the problem. You can't solve it if you don't know what it is, right? Well, then ask yourself, what are my options? Make a list of your choices. Once you know your choices, it's time to evaluate each one and choose which option to go with. What now? Well, now you make it happen. Good work! You just solved a problem. Or did you? That's right. Sometimes even after all this, we find we made the wrong choice. Only one thing to do. Plug in a different plan of action. Remember, you came up with a bunch of them? And try again. Decision making is a big part of problem solving and is the third part of the four-part model. The most important thing to remember about decisions is that we each have our own style of making them. Learn your style, and those critical decisions will be a little easier for you to make, I promise. The fourth and last part of the critical thinking model is metacognition, or thinking about thinking. Don't worry, thinking too hard about your own thinking won't actually cause your brain to tie itself in knots. It only feels that way. It's a great way to improve your critical thinking skills. Metacognition actually happens all the time when you don't even realize it. For example, when you're trying to make a decision. Deciding involves not only questioning and evaluating outside information, but also questioning and evaluating how your brain handles that outside information. Ever ask yourself questions like, do I really want this? Or am I overanalyzing the situation? This is metacognition, and it's part of becoming a more critical and conscious thinker. Plus, just saying the word makes anyone sound smarter. Think about it. To be a truly critical thinker, you must also think creatively. Creative thinking represents the kinds of questions that force your mind to run wild with possibilities and ultimately make you smarter. I know some of you are out there thinking, I'm the least creative person I know. Wrong. Creativity is simply finding new and better ways of doing things, and we all have it in us. Accepting this fact is one of the first steps towards becoming a more creative person. Once you've accepted it, look at the way you view things and try to view them differently. Changing your perspective invariably leads to new ideas. When those ideas start to come, and they will, don't hold back. Let them flow. The more ideas you allow your creative mind to come up with, the higher your chances are of coming up with some really good ones. Lastly, don't put a ban on your thinking. Sometimes there are no right ideas, and therefore there are no wrong ideas either. Allowing yourself to think creatively requires you to let go, which can be pretty scary, but not nearly as scary as one-dimensional thinking and accepting other people's views without questioning and thinking about them critically. Copyright 2009, Wadsworth Publishing.
So students, I think what she said is very interesting, and I want to start by just kind of narrowing down the term critical thinking. Critical thinking is something that you all already engage in. I know I've heard students talk before about, I had one student last semester and he was trying to figure out what job he wanted to take because he was working at Disney, but he, and he thought it was a good company and he thought he could go higher in it, but at the same time it was a far commute for him. He wasn't very happy doing what he was doing. He didn't see a lot of potential for even lateral moves in the time being to do something that he enjoyed more. And so he kind of was saying, maybe I should look for another job. And he did, and he found a couple of other jobs with openings, and he interviewed, but then the process came where he had to decide because they were going to hire him, and he had to weigh the pros and cons. And, part of the critical thinking process is deciding what a pro and con for you is, and then kind of triaging like they do in ER emergency rooms, is saying, well, all things being equal, let's say that there are 2 pros for working at Disney, 2 pros for working at Jimmy John's, and 2 pros for working at, the YMCA. He has to kind of triage those and think about which pros are most important to him, because yes, Disney might offer, room for moving up in the company. It's a well-known company, so it might look good on a future resume. But the YMCA, it might be closer, but it might be less money. But then he wants a career in sports or sports fitness, so that might be the most important thing more than the well-known company. Or Jimmy John's might be the best money, the closest, and yet, the hours aren't so great. So figuring out what's important to you, what your values and beliefs are, is a part of choosing a job. It's a part of choosing a roommate. It's a part of choosing who to date, who to break up with, who to hang out with. But in our context, we mostly talk about it in academic circles or in college in terms of looking at information and weighing information and figuring out which information is factual, which is opinionated, which is credible, which is not, which meets with your value system so you can make a decision and take a stance. And so this pertains to a lot of college classes that you'll go into, especially your social sciences classes, and your history classes, your ethics classes, those kind of things where they'll ask you these more abstract questions. It won't be necessarily like an anatomy and physiology class or a biology class where they'll distribute facts for you to memorize and diagram. It may be things where there isn't one right answer to the question. They want you to memorize information as far as, what schools of thought or what religions are taught in different parts of the world, but then they want you to weigh in on, which religion is more moral or something like that. Where there's not one right answer, you have to show or illustrate to the instructor that you have knowledge, that base level understanding of what you've been taught, but also that you can manipulate it and that you can triage information, you can apply it to your own life. And that's where critical thinking comes in a lot in college. And as far as test taking goes in critical thinking, there are a number of ways these things intersect. One of the most concrete ways when it connects to our assignment is your assignment asks you to come up with different kinds of questions, right? And so you have to come up with some true, false, some multiple choice, some essay, things like that. And as you're thinking, you're composing these questions and crafting these questions, you want to think about the kinds of questions your instructor will ask. So you're kind of thinking back to how they've taught, what kind of information they've given you, but also different levels of questions, because most instructors do not just stay at that. You know, if they're teaching computer science, it won't just be like, what is Microsoft Word? But it will be a more higher order critical thinking level question, which might ask you to say, you know, you're giving a presentation and you have to, you know, include narration or something like that. What is the best software to use and how would you use it? Something like that would be more elevated. And so that's one way in which this kind of critical thinking intersects with the test-taking assignment that you're going to be doing. Also, the test-taking assignment asks you to kind of think about, to reflect on, to use that term metacognition, to think about what you do and don't know. So to craft questions thinking about, well, what would my teacher expect me to know? What don't I know? What should I study? Those kind of things are all around critical thinking. And there's so many directions critical thinking could take, but for our purposes, I'm focusing on two main things: the test-taking assignment and how it intersects with that, and your other college courses and how critical thinking might intersect with that. So one of the things that your chapter talks about in the beginning, and I think this is great for all your reading, is how you will relate to this chapter. Now, it's hard because in college, we're kind of trying to bring you out of that high school mentality of like, this is how I feel, it's just how I feel and what I think, not to demean what you think or feel, but we're more concerned in college with reading information, understanding information, and then you get to have a say in, you know, how to manipulate it, how to apply it, what you think of it. But, you know, it's less based in how you feel and your own experiences than it is based on the research or the information that is the course content. But this slide just talks about, you know, where you kind of come in. So it talks about how critical thinking and creative thinking are defined. It talks about how critical thinking works, how to analyze arguments, assess assumptions, and consider claims. That's what you're going to be doing in your discussion post for this week. How to avoid mistakes in reasoning, how to become a better critical thinker, and how to become a more creative thinker. And hopefully those two last ones also come to play in your test-taking assignment, where you're thinking critically about what you do and don't know, what you should know, and then creatively about how might you craft a question around this content. I'm not going to read through all this, but I thought this was really informative, and this really plays into the kind of critical thinking you do in college, which is constantly asking questions, thinking about, you know, and not questions, although there are no dumb questions. I agree with that statement that, you know, teachers say. We're not talking about the questions like your teacher said something 5 minutes ago and then you ask a question and they've already covered that. So, you know, we don't want to ask those kind of questions, or it was covered in the reading, but you didn't do the reading, so now you're asking questions. But questions where, you know, you don't understand something and you want to know how it works or why you're learning what you're learning. Those are all valid questions. And, you know, those are really the things we want to get at in college, is how does all this work together? How do all these classes you're taking, or the content in your biology course, how does it apply to your life? Those kind of things. Those might be relevant questions to ask. So don't ever think that, you know, the questions you have aren't worth asking. Now, If you have a ton of questions, class time may not be the best place to ask them all. You may want to go to the instructor's office hours and talk with them. And I've had students do that, and I love it, because I would love, there's nothing more that a person who teaches a certain content area, you come to them and you want to talk about that content area. I mean, we live for this. This is why we went into this field, because we love it. So when students have some kind of interest in it, however small, we are so happy. So please don't feel, shy about going to talk to your instructors, even if it's not related to an assignment or a test. These kind of pyramids, I think, are interesting too. And the narration talked about how important some of these skills are as far as life skills go. So problem solving, decision making. Again, these are skills that are not going to go away. You want these skills in whatever job you go into. They're going to want you to be able to solve problems. Maybe not gigantic, let's feed the world problems, but still problems. If you're a nurse, and there's going to be something that is not straight out of the textbook that you encounter. If you are going to be a psychologist, there's, again, something not straight out of a textbook where there's a yes or no answer. So problem solving means sifting through information and weighing the information and trying to make the best decision. And I think what they said too is really important, this idea that don't just think that one try and you're done. If it doesn't work out for you, try a different tack. So critical thinking, I just wanted to stop here for a minute and talk about how this applies to test taking and how this applies to your discussion post. So reasoning, analyzing arguments, assessing assumptions, considering, they left the S out there, considering claims. These are all things that you do when you're looking to study for a test. You're sitting there and you're considering, what should I study? What is most important? What do I value? That kind of thing. And especially when you're writing about social issues, if you're writing about them in your humanities or your literature class or your English class or your sociology, your marriage and family, world religions, all these classes deal with this idea of, that you're looking at what other people said, you're analyzing them, and you're trying to solve a problem. Whether the problem is that racism still exists in America, or women don't get paid as much as men, or athletes, cheat, or people, marijuana is illegal. What do people say on either side of the argument? How do we make the problem that exists in whatever the topic is less of a problem? So that's when you make your decision. And then you also need to think about your thinking. So how did you get here? Did you use a process? Did you go through all the arguments and consider them? And this slide, again, I'm not going to read it all, and this is out of your book. So hopefully if you've already read this chapter, you read this little box in your book on page 152. But it just stresses the importance of critical thinking, and critical thinking that is often a part of a liberal arts degree. So oftentimes, especially now, we hear this big push for STEM fields. And I'm not saying STEM fields are not important, because they definitely are, and they are the future. But a lot of people try to brush the liberal arts, classes under the rug and say that they're not important. But this stresses how there is often, a component of critical thinking that employers really want. And that's really a part of liberal arts degrees. So when you get to your discussion post, there are some articles I gave you that I wanted you to read. And, you just want to look at the claims these people are making and be wary of them, be skeptical. So when you look at them, don't just say, oh yeah, that must be true, it's on the internet. But think about, who is this person? What do I know about them? Are they supporting what they're saying with sources, with facts, with research? Should I believe them? If I do believe them, is there a contradiction between what one side says and the other? Faulty reasoning, your book goes into this a little, and this can be very difficult to understand. In ENC 1101, I spend a long time on this, so, here I'm just brushing through it because it's hard to go into it at all without going into it very, very deeply. But these are things that people do. These are kind of patterns of thinking or speaking that a lot of people fall into, and they call it faulty reasoning or sometimes fallacies. And sometimes people do these because they are not being careful as they think, and so they just kind of go with it. Sometimes they do it purposefully to make something sound better or worse because they have an agenda and they want it to sound that way, so they might kind of distort the argument or the thinking a little bit. So those are things to be aware of as you're going through, and you'll hear more about these at least in your English class, and if you take any kind of philosophy class, probably in there. Just to give you an example that's a little bit more concrete for one of these. So you might say, like, Hillary Clinton is running for president, and somebody says, well, I can't listen to what she says about the legalization of marijuana because she went back to her husband after he cheated on her, and that's just ridiculous. How can we trust her? So you're attacking her personal life and her personally, instead of really dealing with the argument, which, is about the actual content, is about, whether it's her health care plan or immigration or whatever the case is. You're attacking her as a person instead. So that distracts from the argument. It's not real reasoning when it comes to that topic. Problem solving how-tos. So this kind of walks you through the steps that were in the summary, as well as thinking about how to go through it. So when you go through, you can have this up and pause it or look to your book. As you're going through your discussion posts, think about defining the problem, and I kind of defined it already for you there and said that the problem was, should you recommend people sign a petition, yay or nay, and the possible options I gave you are kind of yes, no. You can always come up with like a maybe or a I'm not sure option. That's totally valid. I'd need, some other third option that says there needs to be more information, or the petition needs to read differently, or something like that. Set criteria to evaluate each option. So as you're looking at the different sides, side A and side B, how are you weighing which side is better, which side you should listen to? Evaluate each option you proposed. So if you propose that people should sign the petition defunding Planned Parenthood, then is that a viable option? Is that logical? And then how to achieve the best solution. So in an argument paper, although I don't require this in the post, you might say, how do we solve this problem? Is it by defunding Planned Parenthood? Is it by some other course of action? Is it by standing by Planned Parenthood? What should we do? And then implement the solution and evaluate the results. That's not really something we can do. I mean, as taxpayers, we can sign a petition. I guess that would be the implementation, or we can vote on the law or policy. And that's where, the end action comes in. So this one talks about looking at your toughest class, which I think is a good idea given the test-taking assignment. You might want to do that for your hardest class, and even think about what is the problem. So is the problem that you're not doing well in biology? Well, what are your possible options? Which ones are the best options you have? Evaluate each option you propose. So maybe there's study solutions. Maybe you say, I need to increase the time I study for biology. Maybe making a test on my own is the best way for me to study for a test. Let me try that and see how that works. And then afterwards, you want to evaluate. Did creating a test help you improve your knowledge of biology? Was it minimal? Was it great? Thinking in those cases. And then, in the end, implementing the solution and evaluating the results. So let's say that you compose a test and it works well, it's a great study guide, your instructor gives you great feedback on it. You might say, this is something I want to do for all classes or for just my hardest classes, that kind of thing. And then, like we said, your book talks about metacognition, where you think about your thinking. And this is always great, I think, when students do this. Sometimes they just tend to go with the flow and do whatever's put in front of them. You know, they're just kind of, I don't want to say zombies, because that's not nice or accurate. But sometimes just students, you know, they show up at college because they think it's the next step, or their parents want them to, or they're not sure what else to do. And so they go through these classes because their advisor told them to take these classes, and they show up because the teacher told them to show up, and there's an attendance policy. And then, you know, they kind of go through the class and just do the bare minimum of whatever is told to them. And then they go, wow, I don't really feel like I'm happy with this class. I don't feel like I'm learning a lot. This class feels like a waste of my time. But they don't really stop to question why they feel that way. I mean, does that mean that you should not be in college? Does that mean you should take a year off and work? Does that mean that you should really take some time to figure out your major before you start taking classes so you can feel more purposeful and directed? You know, do you need to go to the instructor and kind of be proactive and say, I'm not really sure how this class relates to me, or I'm not really feeling like I'm understanding the material, or like it's meaningful to me? Is there anything I can do to apply it to my life? You know, I think, and I know that we're all very busy, so I understand that students just kind of come in and they do what they need to do and then they leave. But I feel like if you're not thinking about your thinking, if you're not doing all this for a purpose, I mean, this is your life. It's your life. It's nobody else's. And if you're just going to follow the herd or follow what other people direct you to do, it just seems like a waste of your time. Maybe it's good for you, maybe it's not. But even if it is good for you, if you don't know why you're doing it, or you don't know why you're learning it, or you feel no investment in the learning, then to me that seems like you're not getting your money's worth. And I mean money figuratively there, out of your life and out of your education. So to me, that metacognitive part where you're reflecting on what you're learning in your college classes, you're reflecting on why you're doing assignments, it makes it more meaningful, and you know, and it makes it less arduous, I think, if you really feel invested. So here are some steps to becoming a better critical thinker. So admit when you don't know. So it's okay not to know. It's okay to go through a class and your ethics professor says, think about whether, you know, Marcy should return the diamond or keep it, you know, and you're like, I don't know. I weigh both sides and I'm not sure. That's okay. Or I don't know the material for the upcoming test. Realize you have buttons that can be pushed. So that we all have biases. We all have things like, I just don't want to study biology, or I, you know, am not sure why I think marijuana should be legal, but it just seems like it should. And it seems unfair if, you know, somebody goes against that. Learn more about the opposition. So what does the opposing side say? If you're really secure in your own thinking, you should be able to read the opposing view and consider it thoughtfully without rolling your eyes or without belittling it or without saying it's ridiculous. You should say, you know, there's a reason that intelligent people disagree about a lot of issues that have been going on for a long time. Trust and verify. So if you're looking at sources, you know, say, are these credible? If you're looking at to study for a certain test, go to your instructor, say, you know, is this what I should be studying? Remember that critical thinking is the foundation of all academic achievement. So, you know, I've been talking a lot about classes like the humanities and social sciences and liberal arts classes, but critical thinking exists in your math and science classes just as much. It's just a different form of critical thinking. And I'm not going to go through all the different scenarios because it would sound different to go through, you know, a math problem than it would a social issues problem. But Both of them make you engage in critical thinking. And finally, this is just something from your book. Again, I'm not going to go through it all together, but it really walks you through this idea about how something negative can, really be useful to you. And then finally, your book talks about creativity and how creativity can stem from critical thinking. And I do agree that whether it's creating a test-taking assignment or it's, doing something with writing or social issues or something like that, that students often don't want to go out on a limb. They're afraid to get a bad grade, I think, is what keeps them there. They're afraid to look stupid. They're afraid of so many things. And so that creative option of trying to do something a little bit different, they go, I don't know if that's really what the teacher wants. There's this example. I'm going to do it exactly like this example because, who knows? I don't want to get a bad grade. And that's valid. There's nothing wrong with wanting to get good grades. Certainly that's a good thing. But I think sometimes students focus more on the grade than the content or the assignment or what they're learning. It all turns into like grade, like they're little grade zombies. No, I used zombies twice in this PowerPoint. That can't be good. They're little just, obsessed with grades ideas. So don't discount the idea of being curious and creative in your college career. And I just thought this was cute, because we're talking about different ways to think critically. And this is one of the things they put in your book about being creative, is trying to think about things in a different way, trying to come up with multiple possible views for something instead of just one. And, labeling these cartoons is one of them. So if you have a cute idea or several for this, to caption this cartoon, send them to me. I'd love to hear your ideas. I didn't come up with one that was snappy. I should have. Yeah, I'm not going to try right now on the spot. That would be bad. All right, see my fear of looking dumb. There you go. It keeps me from being creative. All right, I know this was a little bit long, but hopefully it's